The blisters on her palms had broken somewhere outside Miles City, and by the time the stage let her off at the edge of Coldwater, Della Voss had stopped feeling them. She wrapped her hands in the strips of an old apron, shouldered the canvas roll that held her father's hammers and tongs, and started up the rutted main street on foot because she had $11 left and no intention of spending one of them on a ride she could walk. She was 25 years old. She stood near 6 feet, broad as a barn door, heavy in a way that made men measure her with their eyes before they ever heard her speak, and she carried close to 40 pounds of cold iron on her back, as though it were a satchel of letters. The first hard freeze in this part of Montana came in early October, and it was already the second week of September. She had 3 weeks, maybe 4, to find a forge and a roof, or the winter would settle the question for her. She was not asking the town to like her, she was asking it for a chance to work. If your chest is already tight for this woman, do me a kindness and tap that subscribe button now, and leave the name of your town down in the comments, because she is about to walk into a place that wanted nothing she had to give, and I want to see how far her story carries. Coldwater in 1888 was a freight and cattle town pretending to be a city. The railroad had promised a spur for 3 years running and never laid the rail, so the whole place lived on, hauling wagons in and out at every hour, axles cracking on the grade, harness wearing through, horses throwing shoes faster than anyone could nail them back on. It was, by every reasonable measure, a town that needed a blacksmith more than it needed almost anything. And it had exactly one, owned by a man named Royce Dunmore, who also owned the bank, and the scale at the freight yard, and the patience of every official who mattered. Della did not know any of that yet. What she knew was that the men loafing outside the Antler Saloon went quiet when she passed, and then did not stay quiet. One of them, a rangy fellow with a toothpick worrying at the corner of his mouth, looked her up and down, and remarked to his friend that the stage line must charge by the pound now, and that explained why the springs on the coach had been sagging. The laughter that followed was the easy, practiced kind, the laughter of men who had said the same joke about the same kind of woman 100 times and never once been made to answer for it. Della did not slow her step. She had heard variations of that joke in 3 territories. She kept her eyes on the far end of the street, where a sign over a wide door read, "Dunmore Forge and Farrier," and she walked toward it with the steady, deliberate gait of a woman who had learned a long time ago that the world watched her move and made up its mind from the watching, and that the only answer to it was to keep moving anyway. The forge was busy and badly run. She could hear that before she saw it, the iron was being worked too hot, the hammer blows landed in the wrong rhythm, and the smell of scorched hoof told her somebody inside had let a clinch burn. A heavy-set man in a leather apron stood at the anvil, and a younger one pumped the bellows like he was angry at it. Della stood in the doorway until the older man noticed her, and when he did, his face went through the familiar sequence: surprise, amusement, dismissal, in under 2 seconds. "We don't take laundry," he said. "I'm a smith," Della said. "Trained 18 years under my father in Ohio. I can lay a weld you can't find with a glass, and I can shoe a green colt without throwing him. I'm looking for work." For a moment, the man only stared. Then he laughed, and the younger one laughed because the older one did. And the older one wiped his hands and told her that Mr. Dunmore owned every forge in Coldwater, and Mr. Dunmore did not hire women, and that even if he did, he surely would not hire one who looked like she'd be more useful holding the building down in a high wind. He thought this was very funny. He was still saying it when Della turned and walked back out into the street. She tried the livery next, and the wheelwright, and a freighter named Cobb, who actually looked tempted before he glanced down the street toward the bank and changed his mind. By late afternoon, she understood the shape of the thing. Royce Dunmore did not just own a forge. He owned the credit that every business in Coldwater ran on, and a man who hired against Dunmore's wishes found his note called in by the end of the month. Nobody said it out loud. They didn't have to. The way their eyes went to the bank told her everything. She was sitting on her tool roll outside the closed land office, working out whether she had enough to eat or enough to leave, when a small voice asked her what was in the bag. It was a boy, maybe 7, dirty-faced, holding the 2 halves of a tin horse some careless thumb had snapped clean through. His mother, a thin widow named Ruth Akers, hovered behind him with the embarrassed look of a woman who could not afford a new toy and could not bear her son's face over the loss of the old one. Della took the broken thing, turned it in her ruined hands, and asked the boy to fetch her a candle stub and a pin. She heated the pin in the flame, tinned the break with a touch of solder she carried for exactly such nonsense, and pressed the two halves true until they held. It took her 4 minutes. When she gave it back, the boy looked at the mended horse the way other children look at Christmas, and the widow tried to press a coin into Della's hand, and Della closed the woman's fingers back over it and said that fixing things was simply what she did, and that nobody should pay for a kindness that cost her nothing. Ruth Akers looked at her then, the way few people in Coldwater had, like she was a person and not a punchline. It was Ruth who told the man with the freight wagons about her. His name was Eli Marsh, and he ran the only line in the county not under Dunmore's thumb: 11 wagons, 40 mules, and a contract to haul ore down out of the Birch Creek diggings before the snow shut the road. He was a widower, broad-shouldered and slow to talk, with a deep groove between his brows that came from 2 years of watching his margins bleed. His axles were failing. His harness was a patchwork of rotted leather and prayers. Dunmore's forge charged him double for every repair, and took its sweet time besides, because Dunmore would have been glad to see Eli Marsh fold, and everyone in town knew it. So when Ruth Akers mentioned the strange, large woman who had mended her boy's toy with a candle and a pin, and who claimed 18 years at an anvil, Eli Marsh walked the length of Coldwater in the dark to find her. He found her behind the land office, half frozen, refusing to leave, because leaving meant admitting she had nowhere to go. He did not laugh at her. He looked at her hands by lantern light, at the old burn scars and the new broken blisters, and he asked her one question, which was whether she could reset a cracked wagon hub by morning if he gave her a fire to do it in. She said she could. He said he had an old forge behind his freight barn, cold these 6 years since his father died, and that there was stew on the stove in his kitchen, and he would not be able to sleep, knowing a person sat hungry in the cold 100 yards from his door. He said it plainly, the way a man states a fact he is not willing to argue about. Then he picked up half her tools without being asked, and he carried them, and he did not make 2 trips, and he did not make a joke, and Della Voss followed him through the dark, with her heart doing something it had not done in a long time. She had the hub reset and the wheel true before the sun came up. By the end of the week, she had re-ironed 3 wagons, relaid a season's worth of worn shoes on Eli's mules, and forged a set of brake shoes so much better than the originals that Eli stood in the door of the old forge and looked at them for a long while without saying anything. Word travels in a freight town. Within a month, ranchers who could not get a straight answer out of Dunmore's place were riding out to Marsh's barn instead, and the cold, dead forge behind the freight line was glowing red from dawn to dark, and Della Voss had a cot in the loft, and her name, Crooked and Proud, burned into a board over the door. I'll stop here just long enough to ask you something, because I want to know who's riding along with me tonight. If you have ever been judged for the shape of you before anyone bothered to learn the worth of you, type the word "here" down in the comments, and let me see how many of us there are. Now stay with me, because this is the part where the town that laughed starts to understand exactly what it laughed at. Royce Dunmore noticed her, because Royce Dunmore noticed money, and money was leaving his forge. He came to see her himself, which was its own kind of statement. A banker in a pressed coat, picking his way through mule dung to stand in the door of a rival's barn. He was courteous in the way that costs nothing and means less. He admired her work. He observed that a woman of her evident gifts was wasting herself on a failing operation like Marsh's, and that he could offer her a wage at his own forge, indoors, respectable, 3 times what she was making. Della thanked him and declined. Dunmore's smile did not change, but something behind it did. He remarked, on his way out, that Coldwater was a hard town for people who chose the wrong side of things, and that he hoped she had thought it through. Then he tipped his hat and left, and Della understood that she had just made an enemy who would never raise his voice and never miss a chance. The trouble started small and stayed quiet, which was how Dunmore worked. Eli's biggest ore contract was suddenly questioned over a clause nobody had ever enforced. A freighter who hauled for Eli found his loan reviewed. The county scale at the yard, which Dunmore owned, began weighing Eli's loads light, so that he was paid for 9 tons of ore where he'd hauled 11. Eli came back from the yard one evening, gray in the face, and Della, who had been keeping his books because her father had taught her figures alongside iron, laid the weight tickets out on the workbench in 2 columns and showed him in 5 minutes what had taken him weeks to feel and never prove. "He's skimming you at the scale," she said. "Every load since August. Look at the pattern. It's not random short weight, it's a clean 2 tons off the heavy hauls and nothing off the light ones. Because a clever man only steals where the theft is small enough to argue and large enough to matter." Eli stared at the columns. "Knowing it and proving it are 2 different animals." "They are," Della agreed. "So we stop trusting his scale. You hire the weighmaster up at the diggings to certify each load before it leaves the mountain, on paper, with his mark. Then every ticket Dunmore writes that doesn't match becomes a lie we can hold in our hands. He can cheat you once that way. He can't cheat you twice without writing his own confession." It was not a Smith's idea. It was the idea of a woman who had once watched a banker take her father's shop over a debt that had been padded line by quiet line, and who had sworn, standing in the ashes of that fire, that she would never again be cheated by a man, simply because he assumed she couldn't read. Eli looked at her across the lamplit bench, and the groove between his brows eased for the first time since she'd known him, and he said her name once, low, like the beginning of a sentence he wasn't ready to finish. She told him not yet. She told him they had a winter to get through first. He nodded and let it lie. But he carried himself differently after that, the way a man does when he realizes the load he's been dragging alone has quietly grown a second set of hands. The certified weight tickets did exactly what Della said they would. Within 3 loads, Dunmore's short weighting was a documented fact, and Eli took the papers to the county commissioner, who happened to owe Dunmore money, and who happened to lose the papers, and who happened to be very sorry about it. That was when Della understood the true shape of the thing. Dunmore did not own one scale. He owned the men who weighed everything in cold water, justice included. You could not beat him by being right. You could only beat him by making it more expensive for the men around him to keep protecting him than to let him fall. So she played a longer game. She kept copies. She made friends of the weighmaster at the diggings and the widow, Ruth Akers, who took in laundry for half the town and heard everything, and the toothpick-chewing freighter named Cobb, who had laughed at her on her first day, and now brought his wagons to her forge because nobody laid a weld like she did. One by one, she gathered the small true facts that powerful men leave lying around because they cannot imagine anyone bothering to pick them up. And all the while she worked through October, through a November that came down hard and early, through a December when the road to the diggings froze solid and the ore came down on sledges. She forged and shod and mended, and she fed the broken blisters on her hands until they became calluses, and she grew, if anything, broader and stronger from the labor, because the kind of body she had was not the kind that idleness makes. It was the kind that 12 hours at an anvil builds, day after day, the kind her father had carried before her, the kind that the men who joked about the stage springs had never once stopped to consider might be the most useful thing for 40 miles. The reckoning came in the spring, the way reckonings do, when the snow that had held everything still all winter let go all at once. The thaw that year was sudden and savage. Birch Creek, which had been a ribbon of ice you could walk across in January, became a brown roaring thing by the second week of April, and the timber trestle that carried the diggings road across it, built cheap, years ago, on Dunmore's contract, began to groan. Eli had been warning the commissioner about that trestle since November. Dunmore, who held the maintenance contract and had pocketed the money without spending it, had assured everyone it would hold. On the afternoon it gave way. A wagon was on it. It was the Akers wagon, as it happened. Ruth Akers and her boy and 4 other children from the diggings camp coming down for the spring term at the Coldwater School, with a hired man named Prairie driving. The center pilings let go when they were 2/3 across. The downstream side dropped. The wagon slewed sideways and hung up on the broken decking with the floodwater clawing at the wheels, and the whole sagging structure began, slowly, to walk itself off its foundations toward the rapids. Prairie got himself and 1 child to the near bank and then froze, because there is a kind of fear that simply stops a man, and the rest of the children were trapped in a wagon box, 30 feet out over water, that would kill a grown man in 2 minutes. Half of Coldwater came running, and then stood on the bank doing exactly what Prairie had done. They were good men, most of them. They had wives and children of their own, and they could see plainly that the bridge would not hold a man's weight, that anyone who went out on it was going into the creek with the children, and so they shouted, and they threw a rope that fell short, and they calculated, the way frightened people do, the precise arithmetic of who they were willing to lose. Royce Dunmore was there too, well back from the edge, his face the color of ash, because every man on that bank now knew whose trestle was killing those children, and he knew that they knew. Della Voss came down the road from the forge at a dead run, and she did not stop at the bank. She had spent the winter studying that trestle from a smith's eye, the way she studied everything where the iron was sound and where it was rusted through, where the load went and where it failed. She knew the broken decking would not bear a man stepping out along it. But she also knew that the great rusted tie rod that ran the length of the structure was sound, because she had looked at it in February and thought, idly, that it was the only honest piece of iron Dunmore had ever paid for. She grabbed the loose end of the failed rescue rope, took 2 turns of it around her waist, and made it fast with a smith's knot that would not slip, and she handed the free end to Cobb and Eli and 3 other men, and told them, in a voice that carried over the water, exactly when to take up the slack, and exactly when to give it. Then she went out onto the dying bridge. She did not go quick, because quick would have shattered the decking. She went the way she had walked into Coldwater 8 months before, deliberate and certain, distributing her weight along the sound tie rod, reading the structure board by board, her 240 pounds, spread and braced where a lighter, faster man would have punched a foot through and gone in. The trestle screamed under her. The men on the rope white-knuckled it, and Della Voss reached the hung-up wagon, and she did the thing that no slighter person on that bank could have done. She set her boots against the sound rod, and she took the whole listing weight of that wagon box against her shoulder and her broad back and her terrible, beautiful strength, and she held it. She held it while she passed the children out one at a time, hand over hand down the rope to the bank. The smallest first, Ruth Akers' boy last but one, and Ruth herself after that. She held it with the iron groaning and the water rising and her arms shaking, and when the last child was clear, she let the wagon go and felt the whole structure drop a foot beneath her, and she walked herself back along the failing rod, hand over hand on her own rope, while 5 men hauled and the town held its breath, and she stepped off onto solid ground 1 second before the trestle folded into the flood and was gone. She sat down hard in the mud. Her hands were shaking the first time anyone in Coldwater had ever seen Della Voss's hands do anything but hold steady, and Ruth Akers was sobbing into her son's hair, and the children were safe, all of them, dripping and stunned and alive. Eli Marsh knelt down in the mud beside her and did not say anything at all, because some things do not need saying, and the whole crowd on that bank was quiet, with the particular silence of people who have just watched the one they laughed at do the thing none of them dared. The apologies came after, as they always do, in their different sizes and their different degrees of grace. The man with the toothpick came first, hat in his hands, and said he'd talked ugly to her on her first day and he'd be ashamed of it the rest of his life. She told him she'd already forgotten it, which was a lie, but a kind one. The commissioner came, and the storekeeper, and even the older smith from Dunmore's forge, who allowed grudgingly that he had never in his life seen a weld like hers, and asked, almost shyly, if she might show him how it was laid. Della received them all from a bench outside Eli's barn, with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands, and she was gracious where grace was earned, and cool where it was only convenient, and she made nobody feel better than they had any right to feel. Royce Dunmore did not apologize. Royce Dunmore was finished, and he knew it. The trestle he had taken the money to maintain and left to rot had nearly killed 6 children in front of the whole county, and Della Voss's certified weight tickets, every honest paper she had quietly gathered all winter long, found their way, the very next week, into the hands of a territorial inspector who did not owe Dunmore a dime and had been looking for a reason to come to Coldwater for some time. The men who had protected the banker discovered, all at once, that it had become far more expensive to stand near him than to step away, and they stepped away in a body, the way men always do. By summer, the bank had a new owner, the forge had been sold off, and Royce Dunmore had left for Denver, where nobody yet knew enough to laugh at him. Della Voss stayed. She bought the old Dunmore forge for less than it was worth, because no one else would touch it, and she ran the two shops as one, and she hired Ruth Akers to keep the books, and a one-armed veteran named Sully to work the bellows, and, in time, a half-grown girl from the diggings, who had a feel for iron and no other place in the world that wanted her. She married Eli Marsh in the fall, a year almost to the day from the night he had carried her tools through the dark, and she kept her own name over her own door because she had burned it there herself and saw no reason to change it. The old freighters still tell the story, the way frontier people tell the stories that matter, not all in one sitting, but in pieces, to new hands who haven't heard it. On the long hauls, when the road runs flat and there's time, they always begin it the same way. They say a big plain woman walked into Coldwater on foot with nothing but a roll of hammers and more iron in her spine than the whole town had between them, and they say the town laughed at her and turned her out into the cold. And then they say the spring came and the river rose and the bridge gave way under those children. And when every able man on the bank was busy doing the arithmetic of his own fear, it was not the strongest cowboy who tied the rope around himself and walked out over the water. It was the woman they had measured with their eyes and found wanting. She held the whole weight of it on her back, the freighters say, and she did not break, and she did not let go. Some people are handed a face the world calls beautiful, and a body the world makes room for, and they spend it on nothing. Della Voss was handed neither. She was handed 25 years of being looked at and weighed and dismissed before she had said a single word, of being told that the first true thing about her was her size, and that everything else was a footnote to it. And she walked into that judgment every single day. And she laid her welds, and she set her hubs, and she kept her honest books, and she did not shrink an inch to make the small men around her feel larger. And then, on one bad spring afternoon, the very things they had mocked, her breadth, her strength, the great unyielding mass of her braced against a dying bridge, became the only thing standing between 5 frightened children and the cold brown water. The town that had laughed learned, all at once, what she had known her whole life. Worth is not handed to you in a pretty package at birth. It is forged, slow and hot and stubborn, by a person who refuses to believe the lie the world keeps telling her about her own value. And by that measure, Della Voss of Coldwater, Montana, was the soundest piece of iron in the territory. She always had been. It only took a flood for anyone to look. Whatever the world decides about you on first sight, it does not get the final say you do, every single day, in the quiet work of your hands and the steadiness of your heart. Della was never the punchline they thought. She was the strength they needed. So be patient with your own worth. Keep showing up. Someday the river rises, and people see exactly who you are. Please note, this story was created and fictionalized by AI purely to bring you a little entertainment, while sharing a warm and positive lesson about the quiet strength of being truly yourself.